immediately stakes a claim in the center, opening diagonals for piece development and dictating the early pawn structure. Developing a piece toward the center and preparing to castle, this knight immediately contests white's central ambitions. Securing the center's influence, white boldly contests the d-pawn and prepares to dominate the board's core. Solidifying the e5 square, this develops a knight and prepares for a potential fianchetto, aiming for flexible central control. Developing the knight here eyes the central squares and prepares kingside castling, while black's pawn structure remains somewhat passive. Developing the knight to d7 offers a flexible support for future pawn advances, and eyes the c5 square, preparing a central pawn push or knight maneuver. Opening the center now grabs crucial space, preparing an ambitious pawn push to seize the initiative. Challenging the center directly with e5 immediately opens lines and introduces tactical possibilities. Solidifying the center, this pawn thrust aims to restrict black's knight and build a stable pawn chain, preparing for a kingside expansion. Liberating the knight to c5 initiates a fluid, counter-attacking setup, challenging white's central grip and opening diagonals for active piece play. Solidifying the center's grip, f3 aims to restrict black's knight from its most active square while preparing a potential kingside expansion. Unleashing the queenside, this aims to disrupt white's central grip and open avenues for counterplay. Fortifying the d4 pawn and preparing to develop the queen's bishop to a more active diagonal. Developing the bishop to e7 solidifies the kingside and prepares for potential castling, a common prophylactic measure in this complex structure. Developing the knight to this square aims to secure the pawn chain and prepare for a kingside pawn storm. Reinforcing kingside pawn structure prevents immediate attacks and creates a quiet space for further development. Repositioning the knight to c1 is a rather passive maneuver, seemingly aiming for a slow build-up, yet it relinquishes control over the central dark squares. Securing the monarch offers immediate safety, a wise precaution before engaging in central pawn struggles. Unburdening the knight from the cramped, c1 square allows for central redistribution and potential pawn storm preparation on the kingside. Reorienting the knight to a potentially more active square on the queenside, preparing for a flexible pawn push or piece redeployment. Preparing to activate the kingside, this maneuver seeks to exchange the light-squared bishops for better piece mobility. Solidifying the kingside pawn structure defensively, this allows for potential kingside expansion later while avoiding immediate tactical complications. Unleashing a kingside offensive, white seeks to rip open lines against black's castled monarch and exploit the now exposed pawn structure. Aggressively challenging the center opens crucial lines for counterplay, but exposes the kingside if not carefully managed. White shifts queenside pressure, anticipating a potential kingside pawn storm and aiming to keep options open for development. Shifting the king from the impending central storm offers a safer haven. Striking the pawn clears the way, creating a dynamic clash of forces and opening avenues for immediate action. Exposing your kingside pawn structure like this invites swift counterplay down the now open g-file. Castling queenside initiates a sharp, double-edged pawn storm race, potentially exposing the kings to fierce attacks. This quiet maneuver aims to bolster the queenside, potentially preparing for a pawn advance or developing a more robust defensive structure. Unleashing a pawn storm on the kingside to crack open lines before black can organize their defense. Opening that kingside pawn structure to invite tactical complications, a bold gamble for counterplay. Focusing development, the bishop bolsters the kingside pawn structure and prepares to challenge black's exposed king. Sacrificing the rook offers a powerful pawn storm and disrupts white's castled king's safety. Sacrificing the bishop opens a powerful diagonal, exposing black's king and threatening immediate material gain. Seeking refuge, the black king abandons the compromised g-file, hoping to outmaneuver the relentless white queen. Reclaiming the square, white hopes to solidify their queenside presence, but the king remains a glaring target for black's assault. Unlocking the central files is the goal now, as the knight repositions for future action. Recapturing on c5 forces a simplification, opening the b file and potentially leading to a queen trade that could benefit black's cramped position. Recapturing opens the b file, a tactical gift for white's looming queen and rook battery aiming at the vulnerable king. Securing the kingside pawn structure, this maneuver aims to reposition the bishop for defense or eventual counterplay along the opened files. Reactivating the knight to the queenside offers new avenues for development and potential harassment of white's rook. Unleashing a decisive check, white exploits the king's exposed position and the awkwardness of black's pieces. A bold retreat, abandoning the queenside pawn structure in hopes of a counterattack, but it leaves the king feeling quite exposed. Seizing the open file by force, white initiates a decisive attack against the weakened king. Unveiling the king's path creates a fascinating tactical knot, hoping to unravel white's attacking pressure. Shifting the queen aggressively probes the weakened kingside, aiming to exploit the exposed black monarch. This retreat offers respite from the open files and attempts to regroup the besieged king. Shifting the queen to the center repositions the attacker, aiming to exploit the exposed black king and control open lines. Snatching initiative, this check exposes the white king's precarious position and forces a difficult decision. Prioritizing king safety, white retreats to a more secure square, aiming to consolidate before the next offensive. The queen now eyes open files, seeking counterplay and pressuring white's weakened kingside structure. The rook surges forward, seeking to exploit the open g-file and pressure black's exposed king. Securing the queen and preparing for potential central exchanges, this aims to consolidate the position after the recent pawn advances. Targeting the vulnerable king with the bishop repositioning initiates a dangerous mating net. Retreating, the queen abandons the center and concedes precious tempi, weakening the entire kingside structure. Unleashing the rook to the g-file cracks open lines, targeting black's exposed king and potentially forcing critical concessions. Accepting the exchange simplifies the position but opens the king further, a risky trade for material. Exposing the king's pawn shield, this captures the defender and opens the diagonal, creating immediate tactical possibilities around the black monarch. Sacrificing material to open lines for the queen is a daring, but potentially rewarding gambit. Capturing the rook unlocks the g-file, creating attacking prospects against the exposed black king. The queen finds a seemingly safe harbor, but the rook on the g-file remains a potent threat. The forced king and queen exchange ushers in a drastically simplified endgame where white's rook and knight should dominate. The exchange simplifies, ushering in an endgame where black's knight must now contend with white's active rook and compromised pawn structure. Shifting a knight to the advanced outpost on d5 promises to exert considerable pressure on black's weakened queenside structure. Repositioning the knight to the e8 square is a strategic retreat, aiming to regroup and prepare for a counterattack or defense. Opening the f-file now grants white the initiative to infiltrate black's weakened position. Challenging white's central pawn dominance, this maneuver aims to disrupt black's pawn structure and gain an open file. A bold attempt to seize the initiative, potentially forcing a favorable endgame by simplifying the board. Entering this knight to the central outpost prepares to harass the white queen and potentially disrupt their pawn structure. Seizing the open file, this knight insertion threatens to unravel black's beleaguered position. The rook's repositioning attempts to contest the open c-file, but the pawn structure remains vulnerable. This audacious knight foray aims to disrupt black's queenside structure and exploit the open files.